When I was slowly passing an orphan's home one day, I stopped just for a moment to watch the children play. Alone the boy was standing, and when I asked him why, he turned with eyes that could not see, and he began to cry. I'm nobody's child, nobody's child. Just like the flowers, I'm growing wild. No mammy's kisses, no daddy's smiles. Nobody wants me, I'm nobody's child. 'Cause people come for children and take them for their own, but they all seem to pass me by, and I'm left here alone. And I know they'd like to take me, but when they see I'm blind, they always take some other child, and I am left behind. I'm nobody's child, nobody's child. Just like the flowers, I'm growing wild. No mammy's kisses, no daddy's smiles. Nobody wants me, I'm nobody's child. Well, YouTube viewers, that song that I've just sang you was sang by a lady called Jean Mconville, Christmas 1971, in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, United Kingdom. And her daughter reported many years later, when asked about her mother, that it was the happiest moment that she could ever remember, that her mum. They had a hard family life. Her mum was brought up in Belfast. She was born in Belfast. She was brought up in Belfast. She was actually a Protestant, Jean. She was born a Protestant, lived in the Protestant area of Belfast, educated. All her family lived in the Protestant area of Belfast. And that song I've just sung you was one of the happiest memories, or the last and most significant happy memory that her daughter ever had of her, was, as I say, Christmas 1971. She never drank, and I think someone had given her a little bit of a sherry, and she stood up and she sang that song. And the reason I've sung it to you is because after that, pretty soon after that, that song became so prescient for her poor children. Jean was born in Belfast in 1934, and as I said already, she was a Protestant, and school Protestant area family Protestants. Some point in the 1950s, early 1950s, very late 1940s, she met a chap who'd fought in the British Army and married him, Mr. McConville. I think his name was Jerry McConville, and she'd converted to his religion because he was a Roman Catholic, but they settled down in the Protestant area because she pretty soon, like good Catholic mums do, had one baby after another until she had 10 children pretty quickly. They were quite happy living in, there were still the sectarian differences pre the Troubles, obviously there was, but they were more subtle and undefined. To start with, Protestants, it's easier to get a house when you're a Protestant. It was easier to do X, Y, and Z when you're a Protestant. So her converting over to Catholicism to be the same religion as her husband, so she could bring up her children in the same religion of her husband, was kind of something to the testament of her love for the man and her love for her family and her children and everything. Anyway, zoom forward to the end of the 60s, the Troubles started. They were dragged out of their home one day because, as I pointed out yesterday, if you've seen that video I did yesterday about the nature of misinformation and basically psychological warfare on a domestic citizenry and the effect that it can have on the cohesion of the culture and of the society, and more so when the people are already disadvantaged and living in abject poverty, basically. So they were dragged out of their home at some point because the Protestants there realised that, Jean was a Catholic convert and she was married to a Catholic. I mean, they'd been fine a week before that, But as all these psychological warfare efforts were ramped up on the citizenry of Northern Ireland, paranoia became absolute tantamount. It was like, as I said yesterday, it was like the Salem witch trials. Everybody was accusing everybody, everyone was denouncing everybody, and of course there was a lot of people that were selling information to whoever they were selling it to. It doesn't matter what side, but they were doing it, so they needed to deflect from anything they were doing, much like the Salem witch trials. They needed to say, have a look over there, have a look at them, it's them. So anybody that did have a hint, even a slight hint of something that you could point to and say, look at them, come under the spotlight. And this is what happened to the McConville family. All of a sudden, somebody remembered that though they lived in the Protestant area and they were always like nice family, blah 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 blah, they were actually Catholics. They were actually Catholics, and they were physically dragged out by the people, like undefined people, Protestant people, I don't know who, dragged them out and their property, and they were bunked out in the street. So because of that, they had to move to the Catholic side. And I don't know whether you can actually like almost predict, you don't have to be mystic mate to predict what happened. They moved to the Catholic side, and that was fine because he was a Catholic and she was a Catholic convert, but it was pretty soon picked up that convert means just that. I mean, it's the same as what Hitler did with the Jews, wasn't it? A lot of people were Jewish by race, but Catholic by religion, but that didn't really matter when it was occupied Europe. You had the J by race and you needed to go. And that was exactly what was going on over there as well, exactly the same. The fact that they remembered that, well, she might have converted to Catholicism, but basically she was a Protestant, she was a Proddy, she was a British, and he'd been in the British Army. I mean, what more do you need? Really, this is it. I mean, you know, tried, tested and found guilty. Simple. And because of that, they were just meted out the most unfair anybody treatment, you know, that anybody could have meted out to them, and nothing was done. I mean, no police were going to come round and take a statement. It's like in her own children's words, you know, there wasn't a day went by when they weren't being busted by somebody. They weren't being busted by the Ulster Constabulary, they were being busted by the IRA, they were being busted by the other side, busted by some splinter group, you know, the splinter, I don't know what it was, groups like they always did, factions, this, that and the other, to such an extent that poor Jean used to say to her children, you're better off staying out in the streets because it's safer than what it is in here, because obviously they were being used and abused to such a terrific degree, and there was no recompense and no recourse to justice and no recourse to stop it, or not that they realised in the straitened circumstances, because also not long after that this happened to them on the Protestant side and they moved to the Catholic side, her husband was diagnosed with a brain tumour, which was more so a death sentence in them days, and a faster death sentence. So that's why I sang that song, because Nobody's Child was the song she sang on the last Christmas that they spent as a family with her, Jerry, and her 10 children. And Jerry died, actually, I do believe he died just about around Christmas and New Year of 1972. By the autumn of 1972, Jean Mconville had disappeared, and now history has proved that, as people suspected, as her children always suspected, she'd been assassinated by the IRA and factions that are involved with the IRA, and her body had been buried up on a beach in Louth, which I'm given to believe is about 50 miles away from Belfast, and it was only in 2016, due to a landfall, that her body, or the remains, a skeleton or whatever, was found, and her family, or what was left of her family, could give her a civilised Christian burial, and she was laid to rest next to her husband in the family, you know, in the cemetery in their family plot. That's one part of the story, but the second part of the story is what happened to her children, and why that song that she sang was so prescient, singing Nobody's Child, because all of her children suffered greatly. Nobody wanted to take in the children of what was seen at that time, or what was purported to be, or what was denounced and accused as being, of a Grass's children. Nobody wanted to take in these children. It was reported that she'd been seen after her husband died. There was a young British soldier that had been injured, and he was in a pitiful state, and it was reported that she'd gone over to empathise with him, or as a motherly, you know, a mother of 10 children, just a young boy on the floor, and she'd gone over to give him some sort of suck and some sort of tenderness and some sort of solace. And that was basically was the nail in her coffin, literally, so to speak. And like years and years later, it came out that that person wasn't Jean at all. It was one of the neighbours. But that's the nature of psychological warfare for you two viewers. And going back to her children were put in assorted institutions. One of them they were put in with some Christian brothers that were anything but Christian and anything but brotherly. Some of them were in Kincora, some of them were in other hellholes, all of which were abused terribly. Terribly, every abuse that you can manifest upon a child was manifested upon that poor woman's children, and they never got over it, broke their family. And there's plenty of information online, plenty of domains, plenty of outlets that tell you exactly the timeline of what happened to her poor children. And I'm not going to really specify it on here because it's too disgusting and it's too sad. But I've only wanted to say Jean Mconville and just use my platform to highlight how women, children and men, innocent men as well, but women and children suffered, and they suffered so terribly. It really is a damning indictment on our society and on British society and on humanity that this goes on. It doesn't only go on here, it goes on all over the world. And Jean Mconville is just like a poster lady, and obviously she's a shocking story, and she is a shockingly heartbreaking story. I must admit I wept, and so did my husband. We both wept when we heard and we read about it. We couldn't believe that this could happen. And this was the upshot of psychological warfare on a population. This is what it does. And this is just one person. But I'm assured that there are hundreds of thousands of stories, maybe not as bad, but they're all out there. And it happened in our lifetime. And it happened while we were paying taxes. Well, not us, but our parents were paying taxes. And I just think it's a shameful period of our history. A very shameful period. I'm sorry to bring you down, for you two viewers. I'm going to be back in a minute with some jokes.